I had the mic shut off, so I'll do it again. Hello, everybody. I am checking to make sure we've got all the moving pieces going on. I was looking for one of my products that we're going to use today, but I have misplaced it, so I'm substituting with another item from our Advent. And if you are brand new here and you just happened upon my channel, welcome. This is a live stream that I do once a month where I use a very specific set of products, and that is the Spellbinders Crafty Advent Calendar from 2025. And the calendar is full of lots of dies. There's a couple of stencils, a couple of embossing folders, and none of it has to do with Christmas. And I use these products to stretch ideas. So I don't use them even as they're intended, even though they're not Christmas, they're all occasion, and I still stretch them into something completely new. So that is the project that I will be doing today. For anybody who's been around here for a while, I did not have a chance to get the homework PDF up on everything, but I did do a quick post into my channels to let you know what you needed in terms of supplies if you wanted to craft along. A lot of the feedback I've had so far is that people don't usually craft along and that they are doing the project after the fact. So I just let a little bit of pressure off myself as life has been really busy, and I skipped that part for this month. I will likely go ahead and get it up just in case, so it's there for the future. What else do I need to cover business-wise? Again, if you are brand new here, you won't be able to leave me any comments unless you've been subscribed for 20 minutes, and that just helps me keep the trolls out because they can cause a lot of unpleasantness in the comments, and it would be hard for me to stop what I'm doing to take care of that. So if you are new, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, wait 20 minutes, and then you'll be able to leave me a comment. And if you decide you don't want to be here, go ahead and unsubscribe and move on with your day. No hard feelings at all. I know not every YouTube channel is for everyone, so that is just fine. So without further ado, I think we are ready to get started. So I will switch my view to be able to see my desk, and I've got the project sitting right out so you can see what we're doing this time right away. And here is our card for this month. I have created a giant sunflower, and from the homework I had you cut lots and lots and lots of yellow leaves from that worm die set, and we're cutting 2 of the inner pieces from the fish bowl die set. And I have got my pieces sitting right here. So here is the fish bowl piece, in case you're confused about what I mean. We're using the inner piece, not the outer rim piece. And then here is the giant leaf from that worm die set. We're going to be using these 2 pieces a little later. One is the Happy Day sentiment to create our sentiment. Of course, you can use whatever sentiment you want, but the outer edge of the sentiment is what we are going to be using for creating our stem. And we're going to cut a couple more leaves out of green to create green. I have not added a lot of detail to this, but tonight I'm going to go ahead and amp it up a little bit with some extra detail. And so the extra things that we're going to need tonight are, I'm going to use a yellow shade of ink that's a shade darker than the cardstock that I'm using, and I have a blending brush to go with that to add some depth to our flower petals. Let's see, I've got all my die cuts here, and we'll talk about another die cutting technique when we get to the flower. I wanted to use the embossing folder from our Crafty Advent Calendar that had the little floral pattern on it, but I know it's in my room somewhere because I was just using it and apparently I've misplaced it. It's not in my usual bin where I keep all of these supplies. So we're just going to use the other one from the kit, and this one is kind of circle print, and it'll be just fine because we're just going to use this to add one more layer of texture and detail to things. You're also going to need your card base, which I've got as a white, 8.5 by 11 sheet, and I have folded it in half, and I call this half letter card size. There might be one of those A values, like normally we work with A2 cards. This might have its own A value, but I don't know what that is. I just call it half letter. So we are creating a jumbo card today with a half letter size. Yes, you can find envelopes that are half letter size, or if you don't want to buy a whole stack of envelopes that big, you could always make your own. I don't think we'll have time to do that tonight, but maybe I could do an extra video and show you how I make my envelopes. If anybody's interested in that, drop me a comment and I'll take some feedback on that one. I also have this layer of blue cardstock cut. All my cardstock colors are from Concord and Ninth, as is my ink. I just really like their company and I support them. And I enjoy buying their products. Their cardstock is not my favorite cardstock overall, but I like a lot of their colors, so that's why I buy that. And that's what we're working with today. This one is Harbor. This one is not... This one is actually called Sunflower. I was thinking Buttercup, but that's the lighter yellow. And then the darker yellow that I'm using is Stardust, and this one has a bit of a green undertone to it, so it kind of tends toward a little bit more of a browny yellow. And then the green that I'm using, I want to say is Artichoke. I believe, no, Avocado. Sorry, Avocado. I'm not sure. When I figure it out, I will pop a comment in the description of the video. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. You can probably imagine that the project is not super complicated today. It will take a little bit of time just because there are so many parts, but let's go ahead and get started with zhuzhing this up a little bit with the extra technique that I wanted to do. And it's not a hard technique again. I am just going to add a bit of texture across the belly of this card front layer. I did cut this down by 1 inch on the side and 1 inch on the top, not on each side, just cut 1 inch off of one side, one long side, and 1 inch off of one of the short sides. And that is the total width. So this piece should be, I can math in my head, 4.5 by 8 is the total size of this piece. I can put it on my desk here and just make sure 4.5 by 7.5. Sorry, 4.5 by 7.5, because that is 1 inch off the width of a regular sheet of paper. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and, because I'm dropping things on the floor already. It wouldn't be a live stream with me if I didn't drop something. All right, I already kind of know where my sentiment is going to be placed, and that's where I want to add the extra embellishment because it's going to help draw the eye a little bit more to that area. The sunflower is so big that it's taking up so much of your attention that we can add a little bit more going on here to bring the attention down to the sentiment as well. So I'm just going to use this to figure out where I need to put this on my cardstock. So I'm going to put it right about there. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I am going to try and make sure that the edge of the cardstock is making a straight line with the edge of the pattern. I am going to tape this in place so it doesn't shift. My particular die cut machine is very notorious for shifting on me, so I definitely like to have things taped in place. You will have to make sure you use the right sandwich for your die cut machine to do embossing folders, and not all embossing folders use the same sandwich. There are some that are thicker, some that are thinner, so you need to know what your sandwich is. So I have, my sandwich is my bottom plate and then I use a metal shim and a thinner, this is usually a shim plate as well, but I'm going to skip the actual top plate for this one. And I'm going to run that through. If your sandwich is very thick, you will also get the impressions of the edges of your embossing folder, which can be used as a technique sometimes. Let's see if mine did. It did. So you can see, hopefully, you can see the edges of the embossing folder, but you see how it makes a nice belly band all the way across? So that works just fine. You don't have to worry about that edge of the embossing. So that is actually coming from the design edge. If you go even thicker with your shims, you might get the actual physical edge creating another line. So just know that about embossing folders. Depending on how many shims you add to your sandwich, you can get a lighter impression, a deeper impression, or you can get the entire edge of the actual folder. I'm going to go ahead and take a drink of water. All right, so that is pretty dang light. Part of me would like to do it again. Sometimes if you have enough of an impression, you can reline things up and run it through again. I'm not sure that I'm feeling very confident that I can get it to snap into place and run it through again with, I would add a couple sheets of regular paper to my shim layer. I think I'm just going to leave it as is, but you get the idea of adding a little bit more. I'm saying it, you get the idea, but I really want to see it. Let me see. The thing about embossing folders too is that if you run them through your machine again, they often reduce or eliminate any previous embossing that you've had on your paper. So it's possible that even if I don't get this lined up, you know, exactly, it will go ahead and reduce the previous embossing that's on there and come out okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do it again. I'm going to get my bottom plate, I'm going to get my metal shim, and then I'm going to add, you know what, let's go all the way, because this is the thickest sandwich that I use with embossing folders, and that will definitely leave that impression of the folder that I mentioned. I don't know if you could hear that click, but it definitely is tight in my machine with that full embossing layer. All right, I like that better. I'm glad I did it again. So now you should be able to see on the normal screen that texture, and up here you can see that extra line that I mentioned of where the actual embossing folder left that impression. Now I only got one on the top, and that's probably because I sent it in this way through my machine. If you send something in this way through your machine, you're more likely to get both edges. But a lot of, well, let's see, this is, we decided 7.5. Most die cutting machines are only about 6 inches wide, so most machines won't be able to fit that. Mine can, but a lot won't. Okay, so I like that texture. It's going to give me a little more oomph to when I get my title on there. So that we can set aside. That we can set aside. Let's go ahead and do the next technique that I want to talk about. And notice how I have all these little holes cut into what is the center of my sunflower. That's to give it the texture of how the sunflower seeds start growing in there. I've also added some stippling with a pin that we'll do later. But when you cut your fishbowl, the bubbles are only on one side. So what we are going to do is take our fishbowl die, cut your one piece. Once it comes out, we're going to cut it again. We're going to flip it over. So normally it would come out of the die like this. We're going to flip it over and put it back into the die. Now if you don't line it up well, you're going to end up cutting where you don't want to cut. So I'm going to take this curve and really slide it down just till it butts up against the cutting edge of that die. So a little bit of this lip will be sticking up over, and that will end up cutting off. So I'm going to put this little point as low as I can so that I don't cut off too much of this side, but I don't want to put it so far that the cutting blade is going to cut through my bubble. So there's a little bit of wiggle room to this to get it just lined up. And I'm going to bring my cutting plates back, and I'm holding this really tightly right now so it doesn't slip. I'm going to very carefully kind of press it down to my plate. I am going to go ahead and add some tape straight to my die on my plate so that it doesn't slip. And again, my particular cutting machine is much more finicky about slipping. So once I get my middle plate in there and then my top plate, I should be good to go. Okay, you can see I've already cut these pieces. So I have one that has double holes and one that has the single holes. So let's take a look at this and see if it slipped on me. It looks okay. You can see where it kind of cut off a smidge of that piece. We'll just throw that away. And then I like to drop my dies to get things to clear. And now you can see I've got those bubbles on both sides. And so I could end up using both of these pieces, but I liked the difference with having just one side have more bubble details than the other. So that is gonna be our flower center. I did back that with a little bit of black because we're gonna be gluing all of the flower petals behind, and you could end up seeing the yellow of the flower petals through the hole, so I don't want to see that. I am just going to very quickly trim off some black, and I'm not going to be too careful about it, and I can always trim it down more if I need to, but I will trim some black that I can just hide it underneath there, and I'll need to trim a little corner. But I am going to put the glue, I'm going to put the glue on my background piece so I don't get too much glue oozing through the holes. And then, let's see, probably that direction. Oop. Got a little bit of glue ooze, so I'll just kind of wipe that away, and then I can nip off that piece. We'll let that dry, and then we'll do the same thing over here. Again, we don't need a very big piece. Let's go ahead and glue around those holes, and then we can tuck this piece behind. I'm going to tuck it this way so that I only have to cut off one piece instead of nipping off different sections. Okay, we will let that dry, and then we will glue it into a circle for our flower center in a little bit. What we're going to do next is start with our petals of our flower. Maybe I should. If I set this over here, you guys can still kind of see where we're going with this project. So when I figured out how to evenly space these petals on my flower, here is how I did it. I started off with 4 that will go around my circle, And then I'm gonna fill in between each of those 4 with 2 more. And this is gonna make layer 1 with the 4, and then layer 2 will be each of the ones we tuck in between. And these are the ones we're gonna ink. The next layer we'll get to, and because it's so much in the background, I'm not gonna worry about inking that. So that will help save us some time. I am gonna go ahead and get started with this inking. So I'm gonna start with those initial 4 so you can see what it looks like. And I'm gonna pull my ink, trying to decide. I don't need to pull it out too far because with this first layer, you can see most of the leaf. With this second layer, I'm gonna pull the ink out farther because it'll have more of that leaf hidden. So let's start with the first layer. And these have V's scored into it, so I'm probably just going to ink to just past that second V, fading it off into the third V. Okay, and then I'm going to do all 4 of these like that. So you can see this is definitely a darker tone of yellow. It will dry back and lighten up as we go, but I like giving my projects a little more depth like this. Of course, the inking is completely optional. You don't have to do this, but I really do think it makes it a little bit more dynamic, and it can be worth it if you've got the time. And this card would be great for I was thinking about Thanksgiving. These would make great Thanksgiving Day cards if you change out to the sentiment. They're also, you know, just a great end of summer card. So that is where I was going with this idea, and I'm really excited about September's project, and I will show you a sneak peek at the end if I can remember. All right, I've started with the next layer of flowers, and I went up to the 3rd notch with the inking on the first layer. This one I'm going to go up to the 4th notch and fade again. I'm fading it out so it's definitely darker at the other notches. So if we kind of take a little bit of a comparison look, I don't know if this is going to show up too well on camera, but this one is pretty dark up to the 2nd notch, and this one is darker up to the 3rd notch. Again, doesn't matter, but these little details I find make me happy when I put the whole project together, that it makes enough of a difference that I enjoy it. So that is where I'm going with all of these. And I hope you can see that it won't take, if you have a good tone of ink that gives you enough depth, it won't take too long. So we'll just get these inked up. And then I may change my mind with that 4th layer as we start assembling, so we'll see. I'm already really liking this, and I'm thinking that I may not want to leave that final layer plain after all. And even though a lot of this is going to be hidden, I do like to start at the bottom just because I find it easier to get a fade if I'm starting from the bottom and working my way up, because that ink, when it's fresh on the blending brush, it will grab onto the cardstock, and then naturally by the time my blending brush gets up to that notch that I'm aiming for, the ink will have laid down onto the cardstock and naturally have a much less saturated amount of ink when it gets to that place where I want it to fade away. So I am purposefully inking up on the areas I know will be hidden because it really helps the process. Okay, and I think that is looking good. So see, doesn't take too long. Now that these are, we've got our black on there and that part's dry, we're going to overlap these. And I'm going to just kind of start in a corner and just slide it till these two dots are pretty close together. And I will just add a little couple dots of glue along the edge and in the corners. And that's gonna just be what's gonna hold things together just enough. Now you can see that it doesn't look quite circular, so I'm going to keep rotating until it looks more like a circle, which now has eliminated one of those dots. So that is how I kind of made my alignment. And that way it doesn't look like an exact mirror reflection of the other side as well, so it looks a little more natural, and that'll help it seem like we didn't do something weird with our dies. Okay, while that dries, I'm going to go ahead and clean my spot, because that won't take too much time to dry, and we don't have too much of a mess. So really that's probably good enough. So I've got to find my original four. I think this one, and which other one? That's not always, that one goes up to 2, maybe that one. It's not always hard to tell because it just depends on how much or how little ink you've used. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's that one. Okay, so we are going to start gluing our flower together. So I'm just doing 2 dots of glue on the bump of the flower. I want to avoid following this line that the die creates because it already looks a little awkward because we've pieced things together. So I wanted to run that at kind of a diagonal to what we're going to work on. So I'm going to turn it sideways, and then I'm just barely gluing this first leaf on with those 2 dots of glue. And once we get this initial alignment going, everything else falls into place pretty quickly. So I'm going to try and keep this alignment going on with my plus, and then I will move on to the sides, trying to make sure that I have a good kind of perpendicular and horizontal lines working. And if you don't want to make quite a jumbo card, if you push these petals in farther, you'll get kind of a stumpier flower, but it would be able to fit on a standard size card, or maybe just a slightly bigger card, maybe a 5x7 card, and then you don't have to worry as much about the envelopes because some people have, 5x7 card envelopes already in their stash. So that is an option. It'll just be a little stumpier looking. All right, now I'm going to fill in 2, 2, 2, and 2. So I'm going to go ahead and just add a tad of glue to each of these ones so that I can adjust them as I place them under there. I'm going to overlap a little bit. I'm going to place this one under, making sure it's kind of overlapping each of these ones, and that looks pretty good. You want to make sure your petals are kind of pulled out to about the same distance as the other ones. And then I'm going to go ahead and rotate and do the same thing all the way around. So a couple dots of glue. Make sure it's overlapping. And then I can also adjust the distance between these pieces if it seems that one is too close or too far away from the other ones. And you could also purposefully make them a little wonky because flowers in nature are not perfect. Well, yes, we look at it and we can see a nice big round shape. if you look up close at individual petals, there will be a little bit of variation in how close or how far apart things are. So you can build in some of the nature's wonk if you want to. I find it just a little bit easier if I'm trying to get things to give me that nice circular shape, if I try and keep the distance a little more consistent. That way I know I'm getting a good big shape. Now I did do a third layer of leaves, or petals, I guess you should say. But as you can see this flower coming together, it's looking pretty nice without, oh, see, I didn't let that dry enough. This is looking pretty nice without thinking about adding one more layer to it. So you could leave your sunflower just like that, and that is much less die cutting that you would have to do. So at this point, let's think about, do we want to add the extra layer in? And how I did this extra layer is I just put one more petal into the gap left by each of these. And again, you don't want to have it sticking out too far because it makes it look funky. So I'm going to make sure that it gets pulled back. And you know what? I think I do want to ink these. And now that I can see where they are lining up, I can figure out that I want to ink all the way to the third from the top, not the third from the bottom like we did before, but I want to ink all the way up to the third from the top. So I'm going to lay all of these out. And in fact, I like to ink this way, so I'm going to lay them out this direction. And if you got them all laid out, it's going to make the process go faster. Now, I think I counted all my leaves correct, but let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So yes, I have got enough leaves cut, or enough petals cut out, and I am just going to kind of whack this on here. And because I'm going up to this section, I don't have to start all the way at the end. I'm going to go ahead and start where things are already overlapping. And actually I kind of faded it off to the second mark even, so that is what I'm going to do with everything. And I'm just going to kind of whack this on here. That one was a little rough, so I'm going to calm myself down a little bit maybe with the next one and try and get that fade up to the second little notch. Okay, and then I can just pull in my next set of petals, and I'm keeping my mess to just one little zone, so this doesn't have to be time consuming or too messy. If you have all your pieces lined up and ready to go, and just move them into the spot that is already messy. And if you have foamy ink pads, you can see the faded spots on the ink pad where you've picked up a lot of the ink. So go ahead and rotate your ink pad and make sure you have plenty of ink, because if your blending brushes are too dry, it slows down the process. And that part of the ink pad will reabsorb ink from the rest of the ink pad, and it will kind of re-ink itself for a certain amount of time. Yes, eventually the ink pads will dry out as you use up the ink, and you'll have to re-ink them. The thing about foam ink pads as opposed to the fabricy felt ink pads is that they do dry out a little bit faster, because that foam releases the ink faster, so you end up getting more ink on your brush and able to ink your projects faster because of it. So that is the pros and cons of the foamy ink pads. And part of the reason why I really liked Concord in ninth is that they came out with the foam ink pads, and I had experienced them a little bit, but really like trying their foam ink pads, I decided for me, I like how fast the ink releases on the foam ink pads, and I prefer them to the felt ink pads in most cases. There are some techniques that are not quite like that, but in most cases I like the foam better, and that's one of the reasons why I like the C9 products. All right, we are going to go ahead and whack these in place, and actually we can add just a little bit more glue because they are going to be hiding more back here. And now you can see the depth of the shadow happening as we add this next layer. Oops, I got two of them. And with this glue gun, I find that I don't have to put it away every time. I can just set it down and keep working. All right, and because we have more surface available to us to glue things together, we don't have to be as precise, and this part can go a little bit faster than you might expect. So I'm just kind of making sure that the tips are about even. It's not going to be perfect, but that'll help keep the round shape of our sunflower. And I am really liking the addition of the ink. I am very glad that I decided to do that for the live stream, so you can see the difference that it makes between not inking and go ahead and adding ink. And you can decide for you, based on how much time and energy you have, which kind of technique you want to go with. Oh, I just heard some weird rumble outside my door. Maybe it's a cat. I don't know if they're rolling around out there. It's dinner time at our house for the cats is 5 o'clock, and it is 4:39 here in my Pacific time zone. You guys might be in other time zones, or most likely watching the replay at some completely different time, but it is technically dinner time for my cats, so they are getting close to dinner time. They think 4:30 should be dinner time, and I tell them that they need to wait. And then they start fussing because they don't want to wait. So yeah, I've got somebody out there making a little bit of noise. I think my big guy is still sleeping. Trying to move out of the way. He's still sleeping on the couch. Yep. Big guy is still sleeping on the couch, so must be one of the other cats. I've got 3 cats all together. I've got an old man. His name is Jamie. And then I've got the 2 siblings who are the tuxedo cats. And that is Xander and Willow. And they are named after Buffy the Vampire Slayer's characters from the old TV show Buffy. Because that is one of our favorite TV shows. There we go. Let's take a look at these kind of side by side. So what do you think about adding that extra inking to it? I am in love. I love it. Okay, so next up we're going to go ahead and do our stem, and that requires a little more die cutting. So I'm going to bring all this back on. I do have this piece that I was working with to make my sample, so I'm going to cut out as much as I can, but if you've got a quarter sheet of paper, that should be enough for what you need to do. Because as you can see, we're gonna cut out 6 total of these pieces. So I'm just gonna chug away as I cut all of these out. And because I had some leaves cut out of here, I'll probably have to grab my extra piece. Or maybe for the sake of what you might do at home, let's do it fully on a quarter sheet, so you know how much you actually need on there. And actually, let's save our time because we know we need some leaves. Let's go ahead and do our leaves while we're at it. number one, and you should just be able to move it over and get a second cut out of the same sheet. I'm gonna do this one this way. I could always add another leaf to this if I want to, but we'll see how it goes. We'll see what our time looks like. I do try to keep these projects to between an hour and an hour and a half, and it looks like we are about 40 minutes in so far. And this is the last of the parts. We will need to cut our sentiment, but it's not going to take another half hour. I will cut, because I need 6 of these, I think I have room in between here to cut one more leaf, just in case we want to do something with one more leaf. I don't know if I have an idea, but we can see. And I think I will go ahead and grab ink so that we can ink up our leaf as well and give it a little more dimension. So that's 3. Got 3 more to go. Oh, and we're done with. I find that dropping them on the back side actually is a little more effective than dropping them on the paper side, because then the paper energy can pop it up. While that goes through, I'm going to look for, now I said my cardstock is avocado, and I grabbed an avocado ink. With the sunflowers, I definitely used a shade darker. I'm going to use the same shade for this one because it's going to be more out in the open. I want to make sure that I'm not getting too dark. You saw how we got some of the blobby colors on the leaves, but I wasn't worried about that because we were going to hide it. So I just want to be a little more careful with my color on this particular one. Okay, almost there. Almost there. One more of these, and see, you have enough paper from a 1/4 sheet to be able to cut all the green parts that you need. Let me grab a green. I think I'm going to use a smaller blending brush for this part, and we'll see how it goes. Now, because these are the exact same die, one thing I did think about doing was turning the leaves upside down. I don't know if it's going to show up on camera very much, but it has a very slight difference to it when you turn it upside down. And it might make it look a little bit different, especially the way it will absorb ink. So that is just an option that I had thought about doing. I don't think I'm going to do it this time, but that could be an option if you don't like how similar the leaf is to the sunflower, or of course you could go grab a different leaf die from something if you want, but the scale of the sunflower works well with the scale of this leaf. Now I'm going to ink up my new leaf, but I'm going to ink it up on the bottom half because that's where the shadow would be. So the leaf pointing that way is going to get inking on this bottom half. My brush has a bit of a green, or a bit of a blue green on there, so I'm just going to wipe it down a little bit to make sure I have more of this kind of olivey green. And I am just going to pull that, and right now it looks subtle, and that's what I want. I can always add more ink, but it's hard to take it away. So I want to just build up, because I only have 2 leaves to do. I want to just take my time and build up that color. And that is starting to look good. Now, it will lighten up as it dries. So sometimes you want to go a shade darker than you think you need, because it will lighten up and then maybe end up not being quite as dark as you wanted it to be. But I'm going to call that one good. So that is going to replace our plain leaf there, and I definitely like that. Now for the second leaf, this one is going to be behind our stem, so I'm going to add shading straight up the leaf to show that it's sitting behind an object, and then also from the bottom. So this one's getting two different directions of shading. And that hot spot right there will be covered up. Same reason I mentioned before, that because it will be underneath something else, I want to use that hidden spot as a way to help me blend. And then I'm going to go ahead and blend all along that edge. And I'm going to blend even farther to the tip than I did on the first one, because this one is more forward in the sunshine, and this one is farther back where there would be more shade. So that is my thinking on ink blending. Let's go ahead and get a little cleanup. Now we could also ink blend some of this. Because I'm going to glue two of these overlapping, and then I'm going to glue one on top. Anything that is closer to you is going to be a lighter color when you're looking at objects in the world, and anything that's farther away from you is going to be a little bit of a darker color. So I think I'm going to add just a hair of inking to the edges of 4 of these, because those are going to build up the background of our stem. So just a little bit, not as much as I did on the stem. And I'm really trying to just catch the very edge of that cardstock to let that be the darkest part. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the inner edge of the next piece. And you can see I'm doing much littler strokes over here so that most of that ink just catches right on the edge. Okay, let's repeat this. Okay, and the inside of the second one. Okay. And I'm not going to ink the top layers at all. There could be things that you could do if you wanted to, but I'm just going to keep it a little simpler and make it feel more approachable. Okay, for gluing these together, I'm going to take the left-hand arch and I'm just going to add little dots of glue to that right-hand edge. I'm going to overlap it and I'm going to kind of pull it so that the inner V kind of lines up with the one next door. And then I can kind of push them out with my fingernail so that it's kind of as wide as I can get it and still have it hold together. We will add that second, that second layer on top, so that will help glue everything together in the end, and then it will be glued to our cardstock as well. So I'm just trying to get it to hold together enough that I can work with it while we build our flower. And I'm going to get that on there, pulling it out as far as I can go. Now with this one, I'm going to come down just a little bit farther because notice I cut off these tails so that it doesn't look like banners anymore, and I did that at the edge of our blue cardstock. So I want to make sure that when I overlap this, the banner parts are down as far as possible so that I can cut them off and make them look not like banners anymore. Okay, let's get our upper layer on there, and this will help solidify everything into one unit. I just overlap right there. Now these pieces I don't necessarily need to cut off because I did cover them up with the leaf, but I think when I actually build it, I did cut them off so that they would bump up flush together. And there are different ways to do this, but I'm going to just eyeball it. So I'm making sure that my cut is below any of those notches. And then I want to make sure that I don't make, well, I guess, you know, I didn't think about it, but you could make a little bit of a curve in your stem. Oh, let's do that. Let's do that this time, just for a little bit of a difference from our sample. Okay, so you can add a little bit of a curve to your stem. All right, I am going to glue this first part because this curvy stem, I don't want it to curve way off that way because that would be making our flower go too far off. So I want to try and keep it kind of vertical. And because I changed this up with the stem, I've got to figure out how I'm going to cut off this bottom. So I think right about there. I'm going to hold that in place while I just tuck on some glue to keep it in position, and I can always add more glue if it's not down far enough. And hopefully this still leaves me enough room to put my sentiment on, because my sentiment is kind of tucked in to the curve of this sunflower. So we might need to tuck our sentiment on this side instead. We'll see. We'll see. Okay. As long as that one, yeah, these ones are definitely going to need a little more glue right at this junction because I didn't get my glue quite that far up. And see, this one's still wiggling because I didn't give it enough time, but that's okay. I can get it tucked in place, get that cut junction as tight as possible so that it doesn't look like I cut it. And we'll let that adhere while I snip off. And I always like to snip off from the back. And there we go. Now we've got a stem that looks more like a stem. It does not look like a bunch of banners layered together. Oh, I did want to glue my leaf in underneath. Let's see if I can kind of lift that up real quick before the glue completely adheres. Yes, I got it. Okay, so I'm going to tuck my leaf in, and I'm actually going to leave it pulled out a little bit farther than my initial one, and I'm going to put it just a little bit farther down on my stem. And you can make the leaf stick out farther, tuck up farther, just play with it and get it where you like. You can also give it a little curl with your fingers to add a little bit more dimension to everything. You can do that also with your flowers. I'm not going to take the time to do all of that today. Now with this one, because I was hiding the seam on here, I feel like my seam on here looks a little neater than it did on that version. So I am not going to overlap all the way. I am just going to take it to that curved, that upper curved layer, and that's going to make it look a little more round where the leaf is at another location on an object that is curving around. So I'm going to tuck that one in like that. And with that in place, I'm going to go ahead and just give a little glue. Now I am losing the spot for my sentiment. Okay, well, I did come up with some alternatives for here, so I did lose that spot for my sentiment that I had planned on. That's okay. You get the idea. If you like this stem shape better, then I would suggest, if you're going to do the embossing, just move your embossing up a little bit more. And then for our flower, I'm going to wait to glue it on until I get this layer adhered. Now you could add some foam to this to give it even more dimension. If you're going to send this card in the mail, maybe not a good idea, but if you're going to take cards to maybe a Thanksgiving dinner and you want to take a card to the host of Thanksgiving dinner, that could be a good use for this card and a good reason to add even more dimension. Usually I just donate all my cards that I make to various projects. Okay, now you can see I made my leaves just a little bit longer, my petals just a little bit longer than I did on this one, which means this one you'll need a slightly larger envelope. Most envelopes have a little bit of wiggle room built into their sizing that this is probably still going to fit in a half letter size envelope, so it should be okay. I am just going to put a whack of glue all the way around on here, and I'm putting a good amount because this is heavy. I want to make sure that it's not going to shift. And then I'm thinking about, again, that line that we talked about starting with. If I put it straight up and down, it looks a little more artificial than if I rotate it. And then I'm just going to make sure I cover up the upper edge of those banners. You can decide if you want petals exactly on the stem or rotated sideways from the stem. And if you made your petals tighter, then make sure you've got some equal distance top to bottom and side to side. And there we go. Oh, it's looking gorgeous. It's looking gorgeous. Now I think what I'm going to do, how I'm going to change up my sentiment, is that I'm going to overlap the stem with my sentiment this time. And we need to do our last little die cutting, and we're just about at the top of the hour, so we are making good progress on our project. I'm going to start with the actual sentiment itself because these two pieces layer up to create the sentiment, and I like to do that part first just to make sure I've got a nice good cut. These dies from Spellbinders, and I'll show it to you after I pull it out, have spaces where they create the cutting for the letters. On some die cut machines, because these letters are so small in the die making process, sometimes they just impress instead of cutting, and that can be frustrating. Again, I add extra shims, so I am going to add, with my particular machine, I have a magnetic shim and a metal shim. I add both of those, and then my normal sandwich includes the bottom, the middle, and the top. So I include all the shims in my sandwich when I'm cutting these word dies from Spellbinders. So let's see how it did. Usually I have good luck. You can see that the words cut all the way through, no problem. So if you have problems with cutting the Spellbinders words, lots of shims. Lots of shims. I wouldn't do that all the time because that will cause more bowing of your plates, but every once in a while you can get lots of shims in there and not have to worry about it. Now, my tape, because there were so many shims, my tape is sticking. So the slower you go with the tape, the less it sticks. But just know that if you have to tape yours in place, like I do mine, you'll get a little bit more paper tearing. But I tape on the outside of the die cut and not on the inside. And then you can see I have a good clean cut. Now I am going to add layers to the back of this so that it will sit up. It's hard to add foam behind these letters once you get them cut because the foam will show through the letters. It will be sticky through the letters if you get a good cut. So I'm gonna layer it up with more blue. When you trim down this blue, you'll have an inch from this side and an inch from the top. I would use those leftovers to do this, but because I was experimenting, I used up my leftovers, so I'm just using a fresh piece of paper. I'm just gonna reuse these almost dead tapes because that will be enough for holding in place a lightweight cut. And you can back your sentiment with any color that you would like to show through. You could back it with yellow if you wanted the yellow to show through. I'm just going to use the blue and let the blue background, my blue sky color is what I was going for. I'm going to back it with that and let it show through. And I'm going to do 3 layers. Layer number 2, and when you're using this really almost dead tape, you don't have to worry about it tearing your cardstock because it's lost most of its sticky already, and that is a good thing for this technique. Alright, so I have got my 3 pieces. Get rid of this tape because it is pretty close to dead. And we can put our sentiment together. So this, the stem I'm going to overlap, but this stem is already 2 layers of cardstock thick. So if I put all 3 of these on here, it's going to kind of bump up onto the stem and then slant down to the other side, which is totally fine. If that doesn't bother you, then go for it. The other thing you can do, let me go ahead, I'm going to adhere the first sentiment layer with the first backing layer. And so without counting the sentiment layer, so far we only have 1 layer on our sentiment, and if I put that on there, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to bump up more up here and slant down there. But if I put these next 2 layers on and go ahead and trim it where it's on top of this stem, then it'll sit more flat all the way across. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and just glue the right hand side where it's going to sit off the edge of my stem. I'm going to figure out where it'll sit on the stem. I think it's going to come right up to the edge of the A, and I'm going to put my scissors behind the edge of the A and just trim it off. And then I will repeat that process with my final layer. And because I already have a cut there, I can follow that same cut line. And now I've got this side is going to sit flush onto my card, but still give it some depth and dimension. So I need to add a little glue to that part where it sits on the stem and glue on that part where it sits off my cardstock. And I am liking that placement. So there we go. Let me clean up the desk a little bit so we can take a look at our two cards side by side. This one we kept super simple, just as a basic example. And this one we added all of our ink shading. We changed up the shape of the stem. We popped up our sentiment off to the side. And you know, the one thing I did do on this one that I didn't do on this one was a little bit of that ink pen stippling. I use the Stabilo or Stabilo, or I've heard it pronounced by probably by stationary people who probably know how it's pronounced, Stabilo, which maybe I want to say is German, but I don't know. These Stabilo pens have a very fine point to them, and I find it very easy to just come in straight up and down, start tapping dots. I keep a lot of dots right around those holes that are created by the dies, and I will just dot, 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 a lot of dots right around those holes. And I'm just going to keep it at the bottom, again, for that shading purpose, something closer to the sun. The top of the flowers closer to the sun, it will be lighter and brighter, and something farther away from the sun is going to have that shading. So you can see it looks like a little bit like a mess right now because it's just a bunch of funky dots all the way around. And I'm going to make them a little more dense here so that there's a lot of them right around, and then I'm going to start fading them out. So I'm going to get farther. I'm going to make my dots farther apart as I move away from this central location, and that's going to help fade them onto the sunflower and create more of a shadow. Now you could keep them going darker and closer together all the way down. I'm kind of fading them out away from those central dots because I'm acting like those are little lumps and bumps in the center of the flower, and creating more of a shadow all the way around those little lumps and bumps. So I can even come in and add a little bit more just to get that going on, and then fade. You can even just kind of add some random ones here and there, just where you might have little nooks and crannies of your sunflower head where the seeds are starting to grow. Let's take a close-up look at that. You can decide if that's a look you like or not, but I think it adds some nice detail to our flower. All right, I am gonna call it right there. I was gonna give you a sneak peek of next month, so I'll leave it on my screen for just a second. This has been the project I have been looking forward to all year, and I was a little worried I couldn't get it to work, but it's working. It's working. So I'm going to give you a little sneak peek of what we're working on next month. And we're going to be thinking about Halloween coming up. So I've got some green and purple color scheme going on. So that is the sneak peek. I am excited about that one. Okay, coming back to my face, I want to say thank you so much for being here and watching on replay. It's been a quiet stream today, which is typical because I am at kind of an awkward time of the day, and that's all right. Go ahead and leave me a comment if you are watching on replay, because I love to read your comments, and I always respond to them, although I've been a little slower lately than usual because my new job is definitely a full-time job. So that is taking a lot of my energy, but I still love doing these, and I will continue on with September, October, and November, December, we will go back to the brand new 2026 Advent calendar, and I will go back to doing my daily videos as we open every day of the Advent calendar. So that is the plan for the rest of the year. So thank you for joining me. I'll see you next month, and until then, have an artful day.